Selfish in love. Why the people who love the most hurt the most. Love, the most celebrated of human emotions, paradoxically holds the potential for profound pain. This paper explores why individuals who love deeply often experience the most suffering. Drawing from psychology, attachment theory, and emotional neuroscience, we examine how intense love can blur boundaries, amplify expectations, and give rise to a unique kind of selfishness rooted not in ego, but in fear, vulnerability, and unmet emotional needs. In understanding this paradox, we can begin to foster healthier relationships and redefine what it means to truly love. 1. Introduction. The paradox of deep love and deep pain. Expanded. Love is often depicted as the highest human virtue, a force that heals, connects, and completes. In literature, film, and even religion, love is glorified as selfless, pure, and redemptive. Yet, when we look beneath the surface of real relationships, a striking contradiction emerges. Those who seem to love the most often suffer the most.
Why?
The answer lies in the complexity of human attachment and the hidden expectations we bring into relationships. Deep love is not just about emotional connection. It also involves vulnerability, identity fusion, and psychological dependency. When a person loves deeply, they often unconsciously entwine their self-worth, security, and emotional regulation with the presence of the other person. The beloved becomes not just a partner, but a mirror, a shelter, and sometimes a savior. In this state, love is no longer just a feeling, it becomes a psychological ecosystem. Any threat to that system, whether real or imagined, triggers intense emotional responses: jealousy, fear, insecurity, even anger. The deeper the emotional investment, the greater the perceived loss when things go wrong. Thus, the pain isn't just from a breakup or conflict, it's from the collapse of the inner world that was built around the relationship. Furthermore, the more someone loves, the more they often expect in return, whether it's attention, loyalty, validation, or emotional caretaking. These expectations, when unmet, can lead to disillusionment and resentment. Ironically, the very people who give the most in love may find themselves acting in ways that seem controlling, needy, or even manipulative, not out of bad intent, but out of fear of losing something that feels essential to their existence. This emotional entanglement creates what we might call a selfish form of love, not in the sense of greed or cruelty, but in the sense that the love becomes about how the other person makes us feel, rather than about the other person themselves. This subtle selfishness is often invisible, especially to those who see their love as generous and unconditional. In this journal, we aim to unravel this paradox. Why does love, especially intense, devoted love, so often lead to suffering? What psychological forces are at play when those who love the most end up hurting the most? And how can one love deeply without losing themselves in the process? These are the questions we'll explore. 2. The neuroscience of love, addiction and dependency, expanded. To understand why love can lead to such intense emotional pain, especially for those who love deeply, we must look at what happens in the brain when we fall in love. Modern neuroscience reveals that love is not just a poetic experience or a cultural construct. It is also a neurochemical event with striking similarities to addiction. Love as a neurochemical cocktail. When we fall in love, the brain releases a potent mix of chemicals including dopamine, associated with pleasure and reward; oxytocin, known as the bonding hormone, which fosters attachment and trust; vasopressin, also involved in long-term commitment and pair bonding; serotonin, which drops in early-stage infatuation, leading to obsessive thinking and heightened focus on the partner; endorphins, which generate a sense of safety, comfort, and well-being in long-term relationships. This chemical cocktail activates the brain's mesolimbic dopamine pathway, the same region involved in substance addiction. In fact, studies using brain scans, fMRI, have shown that the brains of people in romantic love look almost identical to those of individuals addicted to cocaine. Why the brain becomes hooked on a person. The deeper the emotional attachment, the more frequently the brain releases oxytocin and dopamine in the presence, or even the thought, of the partner. Over time, The brain begins to associate the partner with safety, happiness, and emotional regulation. They become the emotional regulator, a living, breathing source of internal balance. This is why being apart from a loved one can trigger anxiety, sadness, or even physical discomfort. It's not just emotional loss, it's a form of neurochemical withdrawal. Just like an addict who craves a drug to feel normal, someone in deep romantic attachment may feel they need their partner to feel emotionally stable. If the partner becomes emotionally unavailable, distant, or leaves altogether, the brain's dependency is disrupted, causing distress, panic, and obsessive rumination. The emergence of emotional dependency. This biological dependency can lead to the kind of love that isn't purely about mutual care, but about emotional survival. People begin to equate their partner's presence with safety and their absence with threat. The partner becomes a symbolic life raft in a sea of psychological chaos. This is especially pronounced in individuals with anxious or disorganized attachment styles, whose brains are hypersensitive to relational inconsistency or perceived abandonment. In them, the chemical dependency becomes even more intense, often resulting in emotional behaviors like excessive calling, begging, jealousy, or even self-harm. These are not signs of malice. They are the cries of a nervous system in survival mode. When love becomes a fix. In this state, love is no longer about connection. It's about relief. Just as a drug user seeks a high or a temporary escape, the overly attached lover seeks the partner to escape feelings of emptiness, inadequacy, or abandonment. In this context, love morphs into a form of psychological medication. When the partner fails to meet those needs, intentionally or not, it doesn't just feel disappointing. It feels like betrayal, abandonment, or even annihilation. This is the root of the paradox. The people who love the most often suffer the most because their brain has wired itself around the presence and behavior of another human being. Summary. Love is deeply rooted in biology, and the brain's reward system is both a blessing and a curse. While it allows us to bond, trust, and form deep emotional connections, it can also turn the people we love into neurochemical dependencies. This creates a fragile dynamic where love becomes both the source of joy and the seed of potential devastation. Understanding this helps us move toward more mindful, regulated, and autonomous ways of loving, ones that nurture connection without creating captivity. 3. Attachment styles and the fear of loss expanded. At the heart of emotional suffering in love lies a deeply human experience, the fear of loss. This fear doesn't arise in isolation. It's shaped by our attachment style, which is formed early in life based on how we experience connection, safety, and emotional attunement with our caregivers. As adults, these unconscious patterns continue to shape how we relate to romantic partners, especially in times of vulnerability, conflict, or perceived rejection. Attachment theory, the blueprint for adult love. According to John Bowlby's attachment theory, individuals tend to develop one of several attachment styles. Secure attachment, marked by confidence in intimacy and the ability to depend on others while maintaining emotional autonomy. Anxious attachment, also known as preoccupied, marked by a deep fear of abandonment, a craving for closeness, and heightened sensitivity to rejection. Avoidant attachment, dismissive or fearful, marked by discomfort with closeness, emotional distancing, and a strong preference for independence. Disorganized attachment, a chaotic mix of anxious and avoidant traits, often seen in individuals who have experienced trauma or neglect. These styles are not fixed labels, but dynamic patterns that shape how we give and receive love. And they play a major role in the pain of loving deeply. Anxious attachment, the core of painful love. People with anxious attachment tend to invest heavily, emotionally and psychologically, in their romantic partners. They often equate love with survival. When they feel uncertain about their partner's availability or affection, their nervous system becomes dysregulated. Even minor changes in tone, frequency of messages, or mood can trigger panic, hypervigilance, or intense rumination. To others, their reactions may appear clingy, demanding, or even irrational. But to the anxious person, It's not just a fear of being alone. It's a fear of being abandoned by someone who emotionally stabilizes them. This need for constant reassurance and closeness, though often labeled as too much, stems from a deep wound, the early internalization that love is inconsistent and must be earned. Avoidant attachment, the push-pull dynamic. On the opposite end, people with avoidant attachment may struggle to tolerate emotional intensity and dependency. They often retreat or shut down when their partner expresses vulnerability or asks for closeness. Ironically, this can be incredibly painful for anxious partners, who then intensify their pursuit, which further triggers avoidance, a painful push-pull cycle that magnifies the emotional suffering for both parties. Even avoidant individuals, though seemingly cold or detached, are not immune to pain. Their fear is not of losing the partner, but of losing themselves in emotional enmeshment. When they feel overwhelmed, they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because their early experiences taught them that closeness is threatening. Disorganized attachment, the deepest emotional chaos. For those with disorganized attachment, love can feel like both a drug and a threat. These individuals may desperately crave connection, only to sabotage it due to an equally strong fear of betrayal or engulfment. Their relationships are often marked by emotional volatility, inconsistent behavior, and self-destructive patterns. The fear of loss here is not just about abandonment. It's about reliving trauma, about trusting someone who might later become a source of pain. This internal conflict creates emotional exhaustion and often leaves them feeling unlovable or broken. How attachment shapes the selfishness in love. The fear of loss is what gives rise to many behaviors that seem selfish, controlling, or overly demanding in love. These behaviors are not necessarily rooted in narcissism or egotism. They are defense mechanisms that emerge when the brain perceives emotional threat. For example, constant texting or seeking validation isn't about control. It's about soothing inner panic. A jealousy and possessiveness aren't about dominance. They're about fear of emotional replacement. Withdrawal and stonewalling aren't always about punishing the partner. They're ways of avoiding emotional overwhelm. In this way, the people who love the most may actually be expressing the highest levels of emotional fear. Fear of being invisible, unchosen, or discarded. Their love is intense because their fear is intense. Their pain is deep because their attachment is deep. Toward healing, rewiring attachment patterns. Fortunately, attachment styles are not destinies. Through therapy, self-reflection, and emotionally corrective relationships, people can begin to develop secure attachment behaviors, where love is given and received freely, without fear-based control or avoidance. Key steps include becoming aware of your attachment style and how it shows up in your relationships. Learning to self-regulate emotional triggers before reacting. Building inner security so that love becomes an addition to your life, not a condition for your survival. Practicing open, honest communication that honors both partners' emotional needs and boundaries. In sum, the fear of loss in love is not a weakness. It's a reflection of deep emotional needs shaped by early life experiences. Recognizing the role of attachment styles helps us move from reactive love to conscious love, love that heals rather than harms. For selfishness disguised as devotion, expanded, love, in its most celebrated form, is often portrayed as an act of selflessness, an unconditional giving of one's time, energy, and care to another. But what if beneath that devotion lies something far less altruistic? What if, in many cases, what we call loving too much is actually a hidden form of emotional selfishness? This is not selfishness in the traditional sense of greed or indifference, but a more covert, unconscious need, the desire to secure our own emotional comfort through another person's behavior. And it often disguises itself as care, sacrifice, or romantic idealism. The hidden transaction in selfless love. People who love intensely often believe they are giving without expecting anything in return. Yet, on closer inspection, there's often an unspoken emotional contract. I'll love you completely, as long as you make me feel needed, important, secure, or validated in return. When the other person fails to fulfill this contract, whether by withdrawing, asserting independence, or changing, the so-called selfless lover feels hurt, betrayed, or resentful. This reaction reveals that the giving wasn't entirely unconditional. It was part of an emotional economy, where care and affection were investments expecting emotional dividends. This dynamic often leads to the following patterns. Emotional scorekeeping, keeping track of how much one has sacrificed or given, often bringing it up during conflicts. Passive control, using acts of service or affection to earn influence, expecting the partner to respond accordingly. Silent entitlement, feeling that one deserves certain behaviors or loyalty simply because they've loved deeply or been always there. Love rooted in emotional dependency. Many people unknowingly fall into this dynamic when they rely on their partner to meet deep psychological needs, to feel wanted, safe, admired, or whole. In this way, devotion becomes a strategy for emotional survival. The problem is not in wanting these things, but in outsourcing them entirely to another person. When love is used as a mechanism to soothe internal wounds, it stops being about the other person and becomes more about what the relationship symbolizes: security, validation, or even identity. This is why intense lovers can sometimes become manipulative, controlling, or overly possessive, not out of malice, but out of fear of losing the emotional scaffolding they've built around the relationship. The illusion of "I did everything for you." Perhaps the most common phrase in this kind of love is, "I did everything for you." While this may be true on the surface, gifts, sacrifices, support, the underlying message is often, "Why didn't you make me feel what I needed to feel in return?" It exposes the expectation behind the giving. True selflessness in love allows for reciprocity, but doesn't demand it as a condition for continued care. In contrast, disguised selfishness demands emotional compensation, and if it doesn't receive it, it may turn bitter, cold, or guilt-inducing. Emotional control under the mask of care. Some of the most toxic emotional dynamics occur when one partner hides control behind a mask of devotion. Examples include constantly checking in because I care, but actually out of insecurity or fear of being left out. Offering unsolicited help, then using it as leverage in future arguments. Sacrificing personal boundaries to gain approval or pity, then resenting the partner for not reciprocating. In these cases, love becomes a currency used to negotiate power, not to build connection. Self-awareness, the antidote to hidden selfishness. The way out of this disguised selfishness is not shame or guilt, but awareness. By reflecting on the motivations behind our loving behaviors, we can begin to separate genuine care from covert control. Some questions to explore include, am I offering love freely, or do I expect a specific response? Do I feel resentful when my partner doesn't meet certain emotional needs? Is my giving truly about them, or is it a way to feel secure, worthy, or irreplaceable? Developing this kind of emotional honesty allows for authentic intimacy, where both people can give and receive without obligation, manipulation, or hidden strings attached. In truth, the most dangerous selfishness is not loud. It's the kind that hides beneath declarations of loyalty and care. Recognizing this subtle form of self-centeredness doesn't make our love invalid. It makes it human. And only by seeing it clearly can we learn to love with true generosity, not just strategic devotion. 5. The role of idealization and emotional overinvestment. Expanded. Love, when infused with deep longing and unmet emotional needs, often transforms into a story we tell ourselves, not just about the person we're with, but about who they are, what they mean, and what they're supposed to heal within us. This story is often not rooted in reality, but in idealization, the psychological act of assigning exaggerated positive qualities to another person, often in order to fulfill inner emotional fantasies. Idealization, when combined with emotional overinvestment, creates a perfect storm, one where the lover projects dreams, hopes, and even unresolved wounds onto their partner. And when that ideal is inevitably challenged by the complexity of real human behavior, it can lead to profound disappointment, disillusionment, and emotional collapse. What is idealization? Idealization is a defense mechanism that allows us to elevate others, often placing them on a pedestal where they appear flawless, exceptional, or uniquely destined for us. This process is intensified in romantic love, especially in its early stages. We may say, "No one understands me like they do. They're everything I've ever wanted. They're not like anyone else." While some level of admiration is healthy, idealization turns admiration into emotional dependency. We begin to ignore or minimize red flags, overlook incompatibilities, and excuse harmful behaviors. In doing so, we fall in love not with the person as they truly are, but with a mental construct, a projection of our own desires, hopes, and unresolved traumas. Emotional overinvestment, when love becomes a project. Overinvestment happens when our identity, self-worth, or emotional security becomes excessively entangled in the success or continuity of a relationship. This can manifest in making the partner the center of one's emotional universe, sacrificing personal boundaries or needs to keep the relationship intact, obsessively planning a future with someone without mutual clarity or commitment, a feeling emotionally devastated by minor relational shifts or disagreements. In such cases, love becomes less about connection and more about possession. The partner is no longer just a person. They become a symbol of personal value, emotional stability, or escape from loneliness. This overinvestment can lead to a distorted reality where the relationship feels more significant than it objectively is. The lover may interpret a short-term relationship as a soulmate bond or believe that their happiness is solely dependent on being with this person. The psychological cost of idealization and overinvestment. When we idealize and overinvest emotionally, we create a fragile emotional framework, one that is heavily reliant on the partner's continued performance of the role we've assigned them. But no one can live up to being perfect forever. Eventually, flaws emerge, needs go unmet, or boundaries are asserted. And when this happens, the emotional fallout can be intense. Disappointment turns into heartbreak. A love turns into resentment or rage. The lover feels betrayed, not because the partner changed, but because they revealed themselves to be human. The pain comes not only from the loss of the partner, but from the shattering of the fantasy, the realization that we have built a castle of dreams on a foundation of projection. This is why those who love intensely often hurt the most. They haven't just lost a relationship, they've lost the imagined meaning, identity, and future that they unconsciously tied to that person. Why this feels like a deep betrayal. The brain is wired to protect emotional investments, especially when those investments are associated with safety and identity. When the idealized partner fails to meet expectations, it can feel like betrayal, even if they never promised to be the savior we made them out to be. This is why the end of a romantic illusion can feel like a death, not just of the relationship, but of the version of ourselves that existed within it. Healing, from illusion to intimacy. To love without losing oneself, we must learn to see others clearly, not as saviors, fantasies, or fixes, but as whole, imperfect human beings. This requires recognizing when idealization is taking place and gently questioning it, separating emotional need from genuine compatibility, a learning to meet our own emotional needs so we don't outsource them to others, embracing a version of love rooted in reality, not in imagined perfection, but in mutual respect, choice, and growth. In sum, the pain of those who love the most often stems not just from love itself, but from the story they've told themselves about what love should be. Idealization and emotional overinvestment, when left unchecked, can turn love into a one-sided performance, where the cost of keeping the fantasy alive becomes the slow erosion of one's emotional health. By untangling fantasy from reality and intensity from dependency, we can begin to love with open eyes and find connection that is rooted in truth, not illusion. 6. The unspoken ego in romantic love, expanded. Romantic love is often spoken of in terms of unity, two people becoming one, a selfless merging of hearts. But beneath the surface of even the most tender affection, the ego often plays a quiet, powerful role. Not the ego of arrogance or vanity, but the ego as the sense of self that constantly seeks validation, control, and emotional security. In truth, much of what we call love is entangled with the ego's silent needs, the need to be chosen, to be significant, to be irreplaceable. And when these ego needs go unmet in a relationship, the resulting emotional pain can be overwhelming, not because love is lost, but because the self-image built through love is threatened. The ego as the architect of romantic fantasies. The ego does not love for the sake of loving. It loves to be seen, to be mirrored, to be elevated. In romantic love, the ego often attaches itself to a partner's admiration, loyalty, or attention as a form of identity reinforcement. We may not realize it, but we often unconsciously say, "If they choose me, it means I'm worthy. If they stay with me, it proves I'm lovable. If they admire me, then I matter." This transforms the relationship from a space of connection into a stage for the ego's validation. Love becomes not just about companionship, but about affirming our value in the eyes of another. When this dynamic is in place, any perceived threat, neglect, rejection, infidelity, or even a partner's growing independence can feel like a personal attack on the ego itself. Romantic possession and the ego's need to control. The ego craves certainty and possession. It finds comfort in knowing that someone belongs to it emotionally. This often results in jealousy masked as loyalty, monitoring masked as protection, guilt-tripping masked as care. For example, when a partner spends time with someone else, the ego doesn't just feel fear of abandonment, it feels diminished. The ego asks, "If I'm not the center of their world, what does that say about me?" This ego-driven need for centrality can slowly erode the space for authentic love. What begins as devotion becomes emotional surveillance. What begins as intimacy becomes entitlement. The pain of ego wounds in love. When love falters, when a partner pulls away, criticizes, or chooses to leave, the emotional pain is often compounded by a deep wound to the ego. It is not just heartbreak, it is humiliation, rejection, and the loss of identity. We are not only grieving the relationship, we are grieving the version of ourselves that existed in the eyes of that partner. Common ego-based reactions include obsessive thinking, trying to mentally win back power or control; bitterness, resenting the partner for no longer feeding the ego's needs; emotional revenge, wanting the other person to feel the pain we feel as a way to restore internal balance. These responses are not rooted in love, they are self-protection mechanisms. The ego cannot easily accept loss, especially if it feels that the relationship was part of its worth. When the ego hides behind love, many of the destructive behaviors we witness in failed or toxic relationships, manipulation, possessiveness, emotional punishment, are not born from love, but from ego preservation. We fear being left, not just because of loneliness, but because it shakes the foundation of who we believe we are when we are loved. This explains why people who are deeply in love can also become controlling, critical, or reactive. It's not always because they are bad partners. It's because their sense of self is deeply enmeshed in the relationship, and when that is threatened, their ego goes into survival mode. Transcending ego, moving from possession to partnership. True love flourishes not when the ego is in control, but when the self is secure enough to love freely. This requires detaching identity from relationship status, a letting go of the need to be someone's everything, accepting a partner as an individual, not a mirror for one's value, embracing love as a mutual journey, not a trophy, a rescue mission, or a source of self-worth. This kind of love demands emotional maturity. It requires us to observe the ego, to acknowledge its desires without being ruled by them. Only then can we replace emotional possession with emotional presence and entitlement with genuine care. In the end, romantic love without ego is not about disappearing into someone else. It's about standing fully in oneself while still choosing to connect. The ego wants to win love. The soul wants to share it. And the people who hurt most in love are often those whose egos were most quietly invested in it, not because they were selfish, but because they mistook being loved for being whole. 7. Healing, from possession to presence, expanded. The journey from pain to healing in love begins with a shift in perspective, from possessing someone to being present with someone. When love becomes a tool of ego, control, or unconscious need, it stops being connection and starts becoming captivity, both for the lover and the beloved. Healing, then, is the process of untangling love from attachment and desire from domination. True healing is not about avoiding love, but about learning to love differently, more consciously, more spaciously, and more self-sufficiently. From I need you to I see you. The first step in this shift is to move from emotional dependence toward emotional presence. Possessive love says, I need you to complete me. But present love says, I choose you, even though I am whole on my own. This means learning to let go of the belief that someone else's presence defines our worth. Acknowledge the difference between love and need. Relate to our partner not as an extension of ourselves, but as an entire person with separate needs, emotions, and freedom. This mindset doesn't lessen the bond. It deepens it. It opens space for authentic love to exist without the pressure of fulfilling every role, every wound, and every unmet childhood need. Practicing detachment without disconnection. Healing does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means developing the ability to stay connected while also being non-attached to outcomes. This is called secure detachment, the practice of loving fully while allowing others to be fully themselves. This may look like loving someone even if they change, supporting their growth, even if it leads them down a different path. Letting go when love is no longer mutual, instead of forcing it to stay. Paradoxically, this kind of detachment often brings partners closer because it fosters respect and freedom, two of the strongest pillars of real intimacy. Building emotional self-reliance. One of the reasons people love in possessive or self-sacrificial ways is because they haven't learned to meet their own emotional needs. They outsource self-worth, stability, and happiness to their partner, creating a dynamic where love becomes a survival mechanism. Healing involves reversing this pattern through inner child work, identifying the old emotional wounds that created the need to be needed, self-soothing practices, learning to manage loneliness, insecurity, and fear internally without demanding immediate validation. Boundary work, rebuilding the line between giving with love and giving out of fear or desperation. As emotional self-reliance grows, love becomes a gift rather than a strategy. Cultivating presence, the essence of conscious love. Presence is not just about being physically with someone. It means being emotionally available, mentally open, and spiritually grounded in each moment of connection. It means listening without trying to fix, accepting without trying to change, loving without expecting to be saved. When presence replaces possession, the relationship becomes a living, breathing space of mutual evolution. Each person can grow individually and together without being trapped by the other's insecurities or demands. Signs that love has moved from possession to presence. You love someone without needing to control their choices. You feel fulfilled with or without constant contact. You support their growth, even if it challenges your comfort. You feel calm in love, not just excited or anxious. You're able to love again, not from emptiness, but from overflow. The paradox of letting go. One of the deepest truths about love is this. The more we release our grip on it, the more freely it flows. Possession creates tension, resistance, and fear. Presence creates space, trust, and truth. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means allowing love to be what it truly is, a shared experience, not a captured one. And healing means understanding that love, to be real and resilient, must include both freedom and intimacy, not one at the cost of the other. Final thought. Healing from ego-driven love doesn't mean rejecting love altogether. It means reclaiming it, stripped of fantasy, free from fear, rooted in awareness. When we learn to love with presence instead of possession, we discover that the most profound relationships are not those that fill our emptiness, but those that amplify our wholeness. 8. Conclusion. Loving without losing the self. In the end, the heart of this exploration lies in one painful yet liberating truth. The deepest suffering in love often comes not from loving too much, but from losing ourselves in the process. Romantic love is one of the most powerful emotional experiences a human can have. It awakens vulnerability, exposes hidden wounds, and touches the ego like few other things can. But when love becomes entangled with identity, when our sense of worth is defined by someone else's presence or affection, we begin to fragment. We shapeshift, self-abandon, overgive, or possess, not because we are inherently selfish, but because we are afraid. Afraid to lose love, and in losing love, lose ourselves. But the real tragedy is this: we often lose ourselves long before the relationship ends. The path back to self in love. To love without losing the self is not to love less. It is to love from a place of wholeness rather than need. It means no longer molding ourselves into the ideal partner out of fear of rejection. No longer tying our emotional stability to someone else's moods, behaviors, or decisions. No longer seeking to earn love through sacrifice or suppression. Instead, we begin to show up as we are, with needs, with truth, with strength and softness. And we begin to love others as they are, not as characters in our fantasy or extensions of our self-worth. This is where true intimacy begins, not in merging into one, but in standing side by side as two whole people, sharing space without surrendering self. Ego as the silent saboteur and the potential ally. Throughout the journey of love, the ego often lurks quietly in the background, whispering stories of scarcity, fear, entitlement, and expectation. If they love me, I must be good enough. If they leave, it means I'm unlovable. If they love someone else, I must not matter anymore. But ego isn't evil. It's just wounded and afraid. When recognized and gently regulated, the ego becomes a messenger, revealing where we still need healing, where our worth is outsourced, where we are asking others to fulfill roles we haven't claimed for ourselves. In this way, love becomes a mirror. And, if we are willing, it becomes a classroom for emotional evolution. What loving without losing the self looks like. You communicate honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. You set boundaries without guilt and respect the boundaries of others. You allow people to choose you freely, not through fear or obligation. You recognize that your value remains, even if the relationship doesn't. This kind of love is not only more sustainable, it's more transformative. It's not rooted in control, insecurity, or idealization. It's built on presence, mutual growth, and authenticity. Why this matters? Because too many people believe that to love deeply, they must suffer deeply. That true love demands self-sacrifice, obsession, or the loss of autonomy. But love that requires you to disappear to be loved is not love. It's dependency. Loving without losing the self is an act of courage. It means staying rooted while reaching out. It means embracing the other without abandoning yourself. And it means trusting that love, when it's real, will never ask you to shrink to fit inside it. Final reflection. The people who love the most often hurt the most, not because love is flawed, but because their love was wrapped in layers of unmet needs, ego longings, and self-forgetting. But healing is possible. And through that healing, a new kind of love can emerge, one where the self is not lost, but revealed. To love well, we do not need to give up who we are. We only need to remember it, especially in love.